I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part too.
Partly why Starship Troopers is an absolute banger of a movie is because still to this very day you will find people that didn't realise it's satire. Derided upon release as a far-right fascist piece of war propaganda, Paul Verhoeven's 1997 Bug Hunt starring Casper Van Dien as Johnny Rico, Denise Richards as Carmen Ibanez, and Neil Patrick Harris as Carl Jenkins still manages to be a movie you can seemingly love without taking in an ounce of its message. But I can see why it has still managed to fool audiences. I know a lot of people, myself included, saw it when they were probably too young to do so. There's even a funny anecdote from Casper Van Dien himself, noting that all the young boys at his daughter's high school would come up to him excitedly and exclaim that they had seen it. When Van Dien would point out that they're far too young to be watching it, a lot of the boys would exclaim that it was their dads who showed them in the first place. Back in the day, this was just another Alien-style movie about soldiers tearing apart a bunch of monsters. When I was barely double digits old, this was all about the action, the grossness, the gore, and of course, the boobies. It wasn't until I rewatched the movie in my teens that I started to realise, wait a minute, Doogie Howser is dressed like a Nazi. What does that mean? This entire society is built upon war. It's riddled with in-universe propaganda. Are the bugs even the aggressors? Verhoeven admitted that he didn't even finish the 1959 book the movie is based on, and whilst there's arguments for and against whether or not the source material is itself propaganda, the Dutch filmmaker took a very convicted approach. Michael Ironside asked Verhoeven why he was making such a fascist movie, to which he told Ironside that the whole point was to show a perfect dream of what that would entail. Beautiful people holding guns, forced to kill bugs over and over again. In his own words, that's the only thing that Society of Starship Troopers is good for. It wasn't trying to advocate for this world, it was criticising it. And by criticising that world, it was holding up a mirror to our own. Whilst the film had obvious parallels to the Vietnam War, with a confident American force ill-informed about their enemy, it also predicted elements of the Iraq War before it even happened. By making the action exciting, the goriness enticing, it created a tremendously potent feeling in the viewer. I'm not supposed to be enjoying this, but I am. What does that say about myself and my appreciation for violence? What does it say about our own society and the parallels that can be drawn to the movie's far-right futuristic one? I've seen the first film many times, but one thing that I've never been interested in diving into is the sequels. Mainly because they were direct to video, and also because they didn't seem like true continuations of the first film. That was until I learned three things. The second film is directed by VFX mad god Phil Tippett, Casper Van Dien returns as Johnny Rico not once but twice, and that the writer of the original movie, Edward Neumeier, wrote all of the live action movies and even directed the third instalment. I'm really perplexed by this. Neumeier obviously helped to create the pitch-perfect fascist satire that is the first Starship Troopers, so how does that element of the series fall by the wayside in the sequels? How can you have a Starship Troopers movie without it? Furthermore, there's more than enough evidence in the first film to suggest that the bugs never even sent out those asteroids that galvanised humanity against their race in the first place. The bugs go from being monsters to possibly just being warriors defending their homes. When Carl Jenkins shouts, "It's afraid!" we're meant to question whether these bugs are so unlike us, and whether or not they've been pulled into this conflict just like the soldiers who have been sent to their deaths by their power-hungry leaders. But once you've gone there, how can you sustain the bugs as a threat without ignoring all of that juicy subtext?
It's afraid!
So for the first time ever, I'm going to watch every Starship Troopers sequel and see what exactly went wrong, as well as showing why the first film is still so damn good. Here are the absolutely insane Starship Troopers sequels. Starship Troopers 2, Hero of the Federation. The budget for this movie was around $7 million, a fraction of the first movie's budget, and it shows. Oh, it really shows. The jump from stock footage of 1 to 2's budget in the opening news segment is hilarious. Phil Tippett, visual effects legend who worked on Jurassic Park, the Star Wars trilogy, and the first Starship Troopers, takes over directing duties with a script from returning writer Edward Neumeier. What is immediately good about this one is that they didn't try to replicate the scale of the first movie. It starts off with a company of infantry soldiers in the thick of it, as if we've already joined them in the third act. They retreat to a nearby outpost to wait for rescue, and the whole film is then set there. In spite of this, it still looks incredibly budget, but I think this is down to some really awful cinematography and lighting. The framing often poorly frames the characters in question, cutting off bits of their bodies, and the lighting barely illuminates the set adequately. Look at this oversized prosthetic hand, clearly a glove on top of the actor's original limb. The action is always too close up and hard to follow, killing any semblance of fun, and often regurgitating CGI shots to keep up. The whole thing certainly has a made-for-TV veneer which it can't escape, but the biggest problem is of course the script. I like that we're dropped into the end of a bad situation with a squad, story-wise making good use of the smaller budget, but because of that budget, it's all filmed really tight and looks terrible. The bugs are just not threatening. Look at this moment where the bug is just like casually running after this soldier jogging. It's farcical. The only way to enjoy this is to pretend it's a propaganda film made in the universe of the first movie. I feel like all of the art produced in the world of Starship Troopers would suck. The movie makes a fairly pathetic attempt to comment on the body count of war and how these young men and women are sent to their deaths.
I helped train a generation of young people to throw themselves into the grinder. And the Federation just chewed him up and spit him out.
But gives you no reason not to wholeheartedly cheer on the bug killing in a manner akin to the ads of part 1. The idea of the bugs crawling inside people's throats is cool and lends itself well to the budget because you don't have to rely on the big CGI bugs and you can switch the focus to Thing-style antics. The problem is the possessed humans, so really the bugs, just act like mustache-twirling horror villains. The movie cements the bugs as creatures of death, and we're supposed to feel charmed by the humans killing them. Apt that this one is called Hero of the Federation, as it features the kind of cardboard cutout action hero that the first movie would have lampooned in some way.
Poor creatures. Why must we destroy you? I'll tell you why. Order is the tide of creation.
The bugs were once afraid, but now they spew villainous monologues. This was originally supposed to be the Zim movie, with Clancy Brown set to return, and that would have made an awful lot more sense, but he couldn't do it, and so we got an original character plopped into the same jingoistic storyline. Brenda Strong is the only returning actor, originally a twin of the previous character, but with the line cut, it just ends up as confusing casting. Not that her being a twin wouldn't have been contrived anyway. Starship Troopers 2, Hero of the Federation, is important because it would mark the striking shift in tone, budget and premise that would permeate throughout the rest of the series. The idea that the bugs could be seen as sympathetic is axed, the satire and the action are both lacking in equal measure, and really it only served to show how good the first foray into this world was. Starship Troopers 3, Marauder. It blows my mind that there was a Starship Troopers movie in 2008. In the same year as The Dark Knight and Iron Man, Johnny Rico returned as the lead in a Starship Troopers movie. That is mad. Granted, this one was once again straight to DVD, but the budget was over double the last one at 20 million. That is evident from a bigger scale story, more location shooting, and of course the return of Casper Van Dien as Rico. Not that he had too much going on at the time. Bringing back Dean as Rico makes this movie much trickier. There's much more room to go wrong because his presence makes the movie feel like a legitimate sequel, where the last movie could be effectively struck off the list. The character even gets a Force Awakens style "I remember who that is" intro that falls flat because the movie thinks that the characters were the most engrossing part about the original film.
Here I come.
It's definitely better shot with more dynamic movement, and generally wider shots because they have more expensive sets and a prominent desert location instead of the claustrophobic set of the second film. Of course, the bugs look worse than in the original, and then there's weird cheapo design choices like the comically large guns with no iron sights, meaning the actors have to awkwardly run around pretending to shoot things like they're holding Nerf equipment. This bit literally looks like you're going through a video game menu. There's no big new idea in terms of how the bugs operate akin to the second film, but there's two new ideas which are pretty fun. There's kamikaze bugs that act like grenades, and there's a moment where a pile of rocks turns out to be a giant alien claw in disguise that swallows up a hapless soldier. Other parallels to the original movie are purely skin deep, no pun intended, like when the soldiers strip off naked for no apparent reason. Oh no, that's right, it's so that the Marauder mechs can link up to their bodies. Let's go with it in the name of seeing some boobies, I guess. Oorah! This one makes more of an effort to have something to say, but Neumeier, now in the directing chair, doesn't really know how to deliver anything with any kind of subtlety.
This is a very simple ruling. People need to watch what they say.
That is so on the nose.
The revival of religious worship here and in the outer colonies will not be tolerated.
Wait, religion has been outlawed? I would have thought it would be used as a tool in this war-bent society. How is it so effectively outlawed? You're telling me all the religions of the world gave up by the time we get to Starship Troopers? No one was telling the population that God wanted the bugs dead. That wasn't even attempted. Everything was just outlawed. What kind of point are we trying to make here? There's also one other returning character from the first movie aside from Johnny Rico. The brain bug! The brain bug reveal, where it's implied that it wanted to be captured in the first place, completely undermines the original film. Your sympathy is meant to be questioned when the brain bug is captured and tortured, especially off the back of the notion that the Federation are the aggressors and the bugs as a species are just defending themselves. We see Mr. Brain gets tortured by humans with invasive procedures that are ironically censored, and you leave the first movie wondering if it was right to capture it at all, and certainly not to proudly exclaim that the bug feels fear. In Marauder, its appearance is purposely made to look more outright evil, and it blows up a few skulls, which was something it didn't ever seem capable of before. The guy wearing an echo of Harris's Nazi garb in the first movie is the character that kills it in what is meant to be a heroic moment, without irony or further subtext. Go humanity, I guess. Woo! Nevertheless, the bigger final boss Brainbug controlling humans to speak is cool, the design is great, none of it is particularly original, but it's somewhat entertaining as a finale set piece. Of course, it's been tricking the General all along, and there is no intended peace, because these bugs are scheming evildoers who want to destroy us all. The bugs in the later movies are exactly the creatures the propaganda of the first movie told us they were.
With you, a great peace, and they're fucking it up!
No peace? You fucking idiot. That was your job, you cretin! Neumeier said he wanted to show the good and bad of religion, which I suppose is encapsulated by the moment where one of the characters insists they pray in their hour of need, and honestly, you will never guess what they pray for.
Lord, send us an army of angels.
I love that she's just like, pray with me for a miracle. And also this really specific thing, this really specific request that could only be fulfilled by reading ahead of the script. There's no tension, because you know Rico and the gang are coming anyway, so the result is just comical. The poorly CG'd mechs turn up, lay waste to the final boss, and the day is saved. And then at the end, religion is A-okay again. A character literally declares, God is back. It really is that easy. I think this one is somehow worse than the second movie. At least that film tried to make better use of its budget and opted to go for a Thing-esque paranoia angle with the possessed humans. This movie attempts the form of cutting satire present in the first movie, but has no idea how to do it with any nuance and wit. It falls on its face in a bigger way than part 2, and ensured that bringing back Johnny Rico was never going to be the solution to crafting a good Starship Troopers sequel. Was Edward Neumeier less of the architect behind the first film's brilliance? Was the satire filed until it was razor sharp by Verhoeven, based on an initial script by Neumeier? It's hard to say, but one thing is for certain, the movies definitely got much worse without the Dutch director, even when the original writer was heavily involved. Verhoeven certainly still has faith in Neumeier's skills, as he's set to re-team with him for a new thriller entitled Young Sinner. Starship Troopers: Invasion. Marauder is so far the last attempt at a live-action Starship Troopers movie. From there, the film's opted to turn to computer-generated 3D animation, which is a much better idea, to be honest. Moving to animation is a wise idea because the live-action sequels are both hampered by their budgets, unable to match the epic scope of the first film. Animation allowed the franchise to go wherever it wanted visually, and it absolutely led to a better spectacle because of it. I also kind of wanted to watch these animated sequels because the director, Aramaki Shinji, is the guy that completed that Alien vs Predator anime, which ended up cancelled by Disney in spite of the fact it's completed. Well, looking at Invasion, I think it proves that the AVP series would at least look cool and feature some dynamic action. As with Batgirl, I truly believe all films should be released once completed because, good or bad, they are art and must be treated as such. not tax write-offs. Johnny Rico is featured here, as well as the returns of Carl Jenkins and Carmen Ibanez, but since all three are voiced by different actors and have different facial designs, it hardly feels like a 1997 reunion. This one also misses the point of the original, but it's so different in its entire approach that it makes it better. Where the other two try and ape the original and fall on their face, this one is more of a generic Space Marines action romp, with characters quipping with each other amidst an overall lighter tone. It's funny that the original acted in part as the blueprint for franchises like Halo, because this animated movie clearly borrows from that massively popular gaming series, most notably in the new looks for the infantry soldiers. Carmen is in this one slightly more than Johnny Rico, who only has a small supporting role. It's not just the voice acting that makes Carmen feel incompatible with her live action self, there's really no character crossover. Then again, the characters in the first movie were more of a delivery system for the satire, so it would have been hard to really make them feel like the same woman if you're going to change her voice and face. Rico isn't much of a presence in this, until the end where he dons a mech suit infinitely more useful than the last movie's designs, and turns into an arachnid killing Superman. Interestingly, this movie does bring in lore from the later sequels, namely the idea of the Queen using human corpses to communicate. I see why the franchise went down this route, and banishing Newmeyer to an executive producer credit was the right call, but it just shows how much the powers that be wish they had the Aliens license rather than the rights to Starship Troopers. Both franchises have bug-stomping militaristic action, but it's far easier to churn out movies and shows based on the former because it wasn't a satire at its core. In order to make something like Starship Troopers Invasion, you have to actively ignore the original premise. Starship Troopers Traitor of Mars. Aramaki Shinji returned for a direct sequel to Invasion with Starship Troopers Traitor of Mars, released in 2017. Honestly, I am amazed that the franchise has managed to have a pretty regular output since the 1997 original, even if it is a home outside of the multiplex. Johnny Rico is back and voiced by Casper Van Dien this time, but bizarrely looks nothing like him or even the character in some way. The movie sticks with the designs from Invasion. Carmen and Carl Jenkins are still voiced by their respective voice actors from Invasion, Lucy Christian and Justin Doran, so no Denise Richards and Neil Patrick Harris here. The Invasion cast do a good job with what they're given, but it's bizarre to make such a big deal out of Casper Van Dien and Dina Meyer's returns when you could have just had everybody voiced by unknowns. Now they've got Iron Man HUDs inside their helmets to go along with the Master Chief aesthetics, there's jetpacks and more high-tech weaponry to go along with the fact that this was released 20 years after the rudimentary sci-fi tech of the original movie. The tech has gotten better, but much like Star Wars' Stormtroopers, all that armour seems to do nothing against the enemy's standard attacks, and that is always funny. You might as well be shooting the bugs in Speedos, there's no benefit to the armour at all. The humour is quite cringy in places, with a "did I do that?" and "well that just happened" vibe to proceedings.
Whoa! Can't see anything!
Lieutenant, use your infrared.
Okay, my infrared. Oh, there you are!
That's not your infrared, Lieutenant.
Oh!
Amy Snap is a human Federation villain, thus making them more of a sinister presence than the bugs, but it's pretty standard military storytelling that we've seen before. It's not satire, it's a standard, the overseers can't be trusted, they think they know what's best, but they're commanding true heroes who know what to do. Their Machiavellian schemes must be put to an end. You know, that kind of thing. There's still Fednet news segments, but they aren't very subtextual or even interesting.
What about Carl?
He's a general now. I mean, it's not his fault. He's busy saving the whole Federation.
Carl Jenkins is increasingly portrayed as a kind of necessary evil, an anti-hero with different methods to Carmen and Johnny, but ultimately a force against the more black and white evil of their commanders like Amy. Which is insane for a character that started off as Nazi intelligence. You know, people on set referred to Neil Patrick Harris in his Starship Troopers outfit as Doogie Himmler. Yeah, that guy is now the guy who doesn't play by the rules, but god damn it, he gets results. Dizzy Floor's return is entirely pointless. It's just a bit of fan service, and much like Casper Van Dien, having Dina Meyer return amounts to little through a character that is completely redesigned. Would die-hard fans get much of a kick out of this? The character is dead either way. I don't know. I can't really berate a direct-to-DVD movie for trying to do the thing that was insanely popular at the time. Nostalgic callbacks galore. I remember that character. Squee! Disney's going to make $1 billion out of this. I could see these kinds of animated sequels being the route the franchise will go down until someone eventually gets the bright idea to do a full reboot of the original movie. But I highly doubt a reboot would have the teeth of the original and would probably end up being as smart as the other live action efforts in spite of an increased budget and a theatrical output. Still, I can't wait to see a Boyd Holbrook type as the lead. Get that bag, Mr. Holbrook. To conclude, the first Starship Troopers is not really the kind of film that could ever really spawn sequels because its heart is not as an actioner but as a piece of political satire. Once the joke has been played, expanding only the action or doubling down on the idea of evil bugs does not work, no matter what vague notions of fascist critique you work within sometimes. You can only pull off the satirical magic trick once. You think you're getting Jim Cameron's Aliens with Starship Troopers 1, but Paul Verhoeven always meant for it to be a fascist critique through the lens of a fascist utopia. Once the reveal has been made, you can't just ignore it. Morally, the live-action movies just have no idea what they want to say. They'll dress characters up like Nazis akin to Doogie Howser in the first movie, or have generals suggesting absolute fealty is the ultimate weapon, and yet the movies will end with these kinds of characters redeemed as badass heroes. None have the wit of the first movie, nor any clear creative voice. In the first movie, the main characters being fresh out of high school makes them likeable in spite of being part of this war machine because they're all naive to the world and don't know any better. They want to do their part. When Rico watches his parents murdered supposedly by the bugs, we see why he becomes so committed to the cause. But by the later movies, seeing Rico nearly hang after all he's given to that cause, only to have no opinion on it, that just makes him come across like a complete fool. I don't think there should have ever been a sequel, but if you're going to do it, for the love of God, you need to have new characters or you need to shine more of a light on the fact that Rico is now a committed fascist. If you want him to be a likeable protagonist, I think he needs to question the system, especially when he's about to be hanged for doing nothing wrong. And the idea that the bugs aren't necessarily hellbent on war is also something you can't really backtrack. You can still have them as physical threats, but doubling down on the us versus them nature of the war without exploring the propaganda behind it any further is an out and out mistake. I don't think the IP is specific enough that it needs to keep going. There's plenty of other bug hunt space marine fare, even including the Aliens franchise, which Starship Troopers intentionally owes a lot to anyway. And then you have gaming franchises like the aforementioned Halo, other series that took what people loved about the action of Starship Troopers and ran with it to tell different stories with wholly different meanings. So I think it's probably high past time to put Starship Troopers to bed, but that doesn't mean it should be forgotten. I think its legacy rests in the next wave of cool sci-fi that it will inspire, not more generic sequels. A big thank you to my full fat tier patron, Dr. Chike, and Nathan Shaw. If you'd like to donate money to my Patreon, you can find me at patreon.com/fullfatvideos. If you'd like to find me on Instagram, you can find me at full_fat_videos. And if you'd like to find me on Twitter, you can find me at fullfatvideos.